Jonathan Levitt, welcome to Second Nature, buddy. Good to have you here.
Thanks for having me. I was saying to Aaron before, like I feel like I should be on a run right now because normally when I hear the two of you, I'm in I'm in motion.
Well, you just tagged me on Strava, so it seems like you just got back from a run. How was it?
Yeah, I've had a long work day and I was like, I need to get my mind right. So I went for 20 minutes and shot a couple of ketones and we're good to go.
There you go. And you're also probably recovering from a bachelor party last weekend. We got to give a shout out to Tony with a Sony. He's a committed Second Nature listener. He's in the Slack channel. So happy birthday, Tony. How was the bachelor party?
The bachelor party was awesome. Patty, Elon, and David Lamb led an easy trail run around the hills of Santa Cruz, and my ass was dragging. I'll tell you that much. It was a blast, and the wedding is this coming weekend, so popping back to California for more.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, we don't need to talk about bachelor parties. I'm sure there's stuff that's still confidential, but Aaron's here too. And Aaron and I are excited to talk to you and build on conversations that we've had over many episodes about building media companies, building creator businesses, interfacing with brands. And you sent me a message the other day that was effectively like you just gave somebody a 15-minute MBA session on how to think about their podcast as more than just a creative outlet, but as a business. So maybe starting there, give us the high level version of this 15-minute MBA, and then we'll get into the details.
So those were his words, not mine. And much of those words were actually they weren't captured. We were doing a live stream at the Pikes Peak Marathon or the Pikes Peak Ascent, and it was with James Lauriello, and he's an athlete for La Sportiva and has his own podcast focused on the niche of uphill and short, fast stuff. And the gist of it was like, how do you create value for a brand, right? So many, so I like to think about partnerships as a conversation an understand a successful partnership is an understanding of how to deliver value and how to create value. And so today it's not simply enough as an athlete, unfortunately, to just be fast or to just win. And even people like Courtney and Jim, like they're interesting personalities and all they do is win. But they couple that with storytelling. And so I was talking with James about the difference between performance marketing and brand marketing and delivering value for brands. So when you tactically, when you have an initial conversation, it's not, I'm an awesome athlete, I'm an awesome creator, look at me, look at my audience. It's, well, what do you care about? What are your KPIs? What are the things that make you look good in front of your boss and get you promoted? If you know the answer to those questions, you can, the rest sort of fills itself in and the rest becomes really easy. And so, in that spirit, the understanding then becomes, is this partnership intended for brand marketing where it's feel good, it's storytelling, it's impressions, it's, the halo effect of association, or is it performance marketing where they're focused on the bottom of the funnel and they're focused on conversion and sales? And I've noticed that most creators and athletes don't know how to ask those questions or don't even know that they need to ask the questions. And they don't know how to execute on those questions. And they don't know the difference between performance marketing and brand marketing. And the challenge is obviously you don't know what you don't know, but these are things that are fundamental to how people who allocate dollars uh, justify the allocation of those dollars. So if you want to see a partnership continue, you have to be cash flow positive or you have to be delivering value. You have to be helping people hit their KPIs. I've said KPIs twice. KPI means key performance indicator. So things that somebody is responsible for. So when you're at Red Bull, when you were at, if somebody's at North Face, somebody's at Puma, whatever it is, a marketer has things that they're being measured on. And so whether it's impressions, whether it's return on ad spend, my favorite, ROAS, or return on investment, which are two different things. Everyone has metrics that are quotas for them and that their boss holds them accountable to. And so your job as a creator and your job as a partner of that brand who is paying you, yes, they should be paying you unless it's, a very expensive product that they're giving to you that you might be buying anyways. Well, I'm sure we'll get into in-kind stuff later and how egregious that kind of stuff has become. Um, you got to know what moves the needle for them. And so the conversation I had with James that led to him assigning himself an honorary MBA was essentially like how to establish an understanding of what a brand is looking for and then how to execute against that. And if you ask these questions, simply the question of like, what is the point of this partnership, or what are you looking for in your partners, or I saw you partnered with this person, what are you going for? Like, make it tangible, make it tactical, and make it clear that you've done a little bit of research in the pitching and in that initial conversation, and they'll give you the recipe for success. They'll literally tell you how to create a long-term and successful partnership that should lend to money, going into your pocket and enabling you to do what you do. And, at least 3 times more money going into the brand's pocket, enabling them to do what they do.
Typically, the person that you're talking to at that brand is not even really the decision maker, right? How often is it that an athlete is talking to a CMO, for example? So that person that you're talking to has to be someone who can then take and package what you offer and then push it up to the next level to acquire the budget to then be able to pay you. And you're exactly right. You can be a way more effective resource or asset or whatever you want to call it by knowing what are the buckets that they have resources that they're going to pull from to get this partnership deal done, and also what are the goals that they have as a brand that I can actually help them hit through what I'm doing, from content creation, from my athletic performance, from everything else that I offer. It's so interesting how people don't necessarily connect those two things. And for a long, I think athletes are really starting to figure it out now of like, oh, I have to do more than just win races. Like that's not enough anymore. Or not even that, but just like I can unlock 10x if I can figure out how to do these other things, because I see a whole different breed of athlete who is tapping into those buckets that doesn't even need to compete, and they're actually getting paid as much as me who's winning the event.
And then that frees up the need to win, right? And so then you can be a little bit more unburdened when it comes to race day. Dylan, I'm curious, your thoughts on something like this. Like, if you had free trail when you were racing at the highest level, do you think that having that I don't want to say fallback, but that backstop and that ability to put food on your table separate from athletic performance, would that have changed things for you?
The sad truth about free trail is that I'm simultaneously the worst athlete I've ever been and also maybe the most relevant I've ever been in my sport. And there's a lot of things that I would have done differently in hindsight. One of those being not sacrificing my fitness as much as I did. But to answer your question, yeah, absolutely. If I would have started the podcast even in a lower lift style, maybe even less frequent and with significantly less effort, I do believe that it likely would have increased my earning power as just a pure athlete.
And probably more wins.
It could be, although, I think this is a rich conversation to have as to at what point do you prioritize which part of your career, right?
Right.
And so if you're trying to be a full-time content creator and you have a lot of partnerships that are specifically attached to KPIs as it relates to your content creation, then in all likelihood that's going to steal some energy and attention
Sure.
that will negatively impact your running career. Whereas if you're specifically focused only on running and hitting podiums and the content creation piece is supplementary, like it is for a lot of NBA players right now, like Draymond Green is a perfect example. For him it's all about basketball, and then turning the microphone on and doing a podcast is purely for fun and entertainment, not necessarily to hit KPIs. And of course, he's got a team behind the scenes who's helping him with that stuff now. And professional basketball is a lot different than professional trail running,
Just a
but
little bit.
you get the point.
I wonder what the point is for diminishing returns, though, because in my estimation, you've established yourself as one of the greats when it comes to ultra running. You've won a bunch of races, you've been all over the world, you've created all kinds of content, you've done the projects. What, I mean, not that I don't want to see you line up at races in the future, but like, what would another win actually do for you at this stage now that you do have credibility, now that you do have a media platform? You know,
But look at David Roche.
Yep.
Look at what David did. His Patreon numbers have doubled, and he has way more opportunities than he's ever had before. He could have a shoe contract if he wanted, but he likes to be a free agent. And it's a really interesting place where he can be a content creator and coach and setting course records at the same time.
So this is a perfect conversation. I'm so glad you brought this up. And Aaron, you'll know exactly where I'm going with this. But David, of course, and his wife Megan have a very popular podcast, the Swap podcast. It's so rich and abundant with valuable information for people who are trying to be better as runners. Their real business, though, is coaching, which allows him to not have to be on the hustle to secure a footwear and apparel sponsorship deal. And it also means that likely they don't have to monetize their media platform in the same way that traditional media companies like my own has to. In other words, his bottom of the funnel is very clear. It's in all
And
likelihood
consistent.
and very consistent, right? And which gives him so much flexibility as a pure athlete. And that's probably one of the contributing factors to what he just did at Leadville, because he's not worried about his shoe deal. He's got
Yep.
a crew of Patreon supporters behind him, and he knows that between he and Megan, they have one of, if not the biggest and most healthy coaching businesses in all of endurance sport. So he's got a very interesting business, and a very powerful media platform, and those two things are slightly disconnected. They're not entirely linked.
yeah, I get that. I do. Winning races makes you a very credible coach. I 100% get that. The point I guess I was trying to make is more about you specifically. Like, you already have race wins, you already have the credibility that comes with that. And so, do you actually get anything meaningful out of more wins at this stage because you have the company built up, because you have the credibility? Like, aren't you sort of maxed out on credibility? I don't know. I tend to think so.
Well, I don't know. It would feel pretty good to be a good athlete and win a race
Yeah,
again,
yeah.
just for
I mean, we
personal
talked about that.
satisfaction. Yeah.
We did talk about that on sort of our Galaxy Brain discussion. That it was like, well, what if you did go back towards the athlete setup,
Yeah.
right? Like, that could be really interesting.
Which is, go ahead, finish your thought.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say this is the perfect segue to the brand marketing versus performance marketing conversation, right? Because brands, as they're evaluating their ad spend, think of how their expectations from their athlete partners versus their media partners. So, Jonathan, maybe give us a quick tutorial on the difference between brand marketing and performance marketing. I know you've already mentioned it, but maybe go a little deeper.
So performance marketing is a formula, right? You have a machine where if you put $1 in, you anticipate getting $3 out or $5 out. And once you establish this formula, then the people who own the budget are responsible for scaling it. And at a brand, you can scale it by adding more and more and more partners. You can go bigger with your partners. You can increase turn the spigot on higher and let the dollars flow out faster. And as long as they continue to come in at that formulaic 3-to-1 return on ad spend or 5-to-1 return on ad spend, it just works until it doesn't, right? And so 2021, 2022 was this period of time when this was the game, right? Performance marketing, ad sales, sponsorship dollars were flowing over those 2 years in particular. And then the challenge is at some point it stops. And at some point it stops working. And there's really no rhyme or reason. It's the customer acquisition cost goes up, competition goes in, people stop liking the product, or just the wave crashes. If that's not supported by brand marketing and community and storytelling and brand building and documentaries and feel good marketing and the halo effect of working with awesome people and all of this stuff that's very subjective, whereas performance marketing is extremely objective and dollar driven and dollar oriented, brand marketing is the feel good stuff that's really hard to measure, but it just works. And as long as you have the right people, it will continue to work and provide that sort of air support for the performance marketing that drives the dollars in the door. And so when you have the combination of the two, it's a roaring machine, and things go very smoothly, and you can predict what growth looks like. And for brands that are either newer in the space, or an action leading to a reaction is very impactful, like they must know these things. And then at broader scale, the way that they pull on these levers is having an agency do it, so that you get much broader scale. So PR firms, groups like that. You had Jess from Outside PR. That conversation was all about brand marketing and the storytelling and everything related to the feel good part and the athletes and the partnerships and that side of the coin.
I love how you talked about the idea of air cover, because I think it's something feels necessary in a lot of ways when it comes to building out the brand and getting, sales and everybody in the door. What I feel is most dangerous about performance marketing, exactly like you said, it's like a formula where you're like, I put $1 in, I get $3 out. And then you start to look at everything through that lens. Well, how come my athlete spend isn't $1 in, $3 out? Why am I putting on events? Why? And you start questioning all the things that actually build the brand under the same formula that you're getting out of performance marketing. And like we've seen in the last year or two, at some point, the party's kind of over with some of this performance marketing stuff, or the sustainability of it just gets obscene, where you're not getting that same return, and you're not getting customers returning. It was a one-time kind of deal in the first place, and that's
Totally.
that's
And
where it
there's a
gets
lot of
dangerous.
and there's a lot of churn that can happen in performance marketing as well, right? So like I did a partnership with a solar company, and over a 9-month period, we drove 7 transactions for $350,000. They paid me about $20K on that. It's somewhere around a 13x return on ad spend. The longer they continue to pay me, the lower the return on ad spend becomes. That 13x multiple all of a sudden becomes 5x, and all of a sudden becomes 3x, and all of a sudden becomes 1x, and then it's negative. And so there's a tail on any of this stuff, and there's an end, like an established end date, unless it's a consumable product. So the solar system is $27,000 average order, and you buy one unless you move. With you know gnarly nutrition, or shoes, or whatever it might be, like you're consuming this stuff on a regular basis, and there's always competition and switching that occurs. So the brand marketing and performance marketing can work harmoniously in keeping somebody with the brand and continuing to deliver that value.
So just to clarify things for the audience here who might be a little bit confused as to the distinction between the two strategies. The North Face's recent We Play Different campaign was a brand campaign. And whatever they spent to put that on TV or YouTube ads, they view as brand marketing. If the North Face was sponsoring a podcast, for example, with a 15% discount code, and they would have somebody on their growth team that is likely doing the calculations on the back end to understand what that return on ad spend is, who's doing the evaluation, that would fall in the performance marketing bucket. So I just wanted to be clear on that. And it would probably
Perfect
make sense
example.
now to also just step back for a second and establish Jonathan, why you know what the hell you're talking about here, because you are both a content creator. You just mentioned this partnership you did with the solar company, but you also worked for Inside Tracker for a long time, managing some of these advertising budgets. So maybe you could just explain a little bit of both to the audience.
Yeah, sure. So I joined Inside Tracker 10 years ago. Before that, I was at a company doing that was selling spirulina and chlorella algae. We grew a brand ambassador program in 2012 and 2013 when it was an extremely novel concept, and you'd like put a discount code online and immediately it would get used. It was very wonderful. There was no noise at the time, so I grew up in the running space professionally, certainly not as an athlete. And at Inside Tracker, I've focused on consumer sales for 8 years and then enterprise sales for the last 2 years. And so this enterprise sales process is similar to the sales process of selling sponsorship, because you need to have an internal champion, you need to know that they have a budget, you need to know their timeline, and you need to know what helps them win, right? So I have also supported my teammates on our marketing side on the brand ambassador programs, on the sponsorship programs. I pushed us to sponsor Western states and get us involved there. We sponsored many athletes in the trail world as soon as we could, and it was really exciting to be a part of that. And then in 2019, I created my own podcast. The podcast came about because I was meeting so many athletes through my work at Inside Tracker, where we do personalized nutrition through blood analysis, and you can pair a wearable, or you can do a DNA test as well, and we give you guidance on exactly what to do. So eat this food, take a supplement in this dosage if your goal is better sleep or improve your recovery or heart health or whatever it might be. So as you can imagine, trail runners like Dylan were pretty interested in understanding their body and their blood work and how to improve. And I was just falling into the trail running rabbit hole, having been initially introduced by Mike Wardian and then Devin Yanko in 2015. I was like, what the hell are these people doing? This is nuts. And as I continued to fall down that rabbit hole, I met people like Zach Miller and was just learning from them. And very specifically, I asked him, like, he was running 150 miles a week at the time. I was like, why are you doing this? And he put his fork down and he talked for 10 minutes. Now, anyone who's ever shared a meal with Zach knows how significant it is that he put his fork down for 10 minutes. Dylan's laughing because he's seen it. And I was like, wow, that was fascinating. And then I heard a podcast between Mario Fraioli and Billy Yang talking about iron sharpens iron, talking about more podcasters coming into the space. This was December of 2018. I was like, all right, I'm going to create a podcast. So my first was January of 2019. I've done 340 since then. About 3 years ago, it really became a revenue generating thing. 2 years ago, I hired a podcast producer, Emily of Wild Poppy Creative, Wild Poppy Collective.
Friend of the show. Friend of the show.
She's amazing. And I have a roster of contractors that execute for me, and I need to pay them. So that comes from, I don't have a Patreon, that comes from selling sponsorship. And so I've been able to do that in a way that puts food on the table for between 4 and 6 contractors on a consistent basis for the last 2 years, and leaves me with a little fun money on the side. But yeah, it's been a fun project that I have needed to drive revenue for, because I don't have the time to execute it, because, as you said, I have a full-time job. And so all these other contractors are basically, all I do is talk to people. I talk to the brand partners and I talk to the guests, and then somebody else executes everything from there, whether it's the social components, whether it's video or audio, and the actual distribution of the podcast and communication with the guests.
Where do we go from here? How about iron sharpens iron? A bunch of podcasters together on a podcast talking about how to grow a podcast. You want to have a galaxy brain session? What do you think? I'm in.
Yeah, we sort of gave you the assignment to critique Second Nature and tell us what to do with this when we do take it from it being a fun side project for Aaron and I to potentially being a revenue generating thing that can be self-sustaining in the future.
Sure.
I don't know if we want to start there, but go ahead.
Yeah, let's start there. So I think about the revenue generating component in a couple of ways, right? What you're doing is distributing knowledge. There are two ways that I see potential monetizing this. One, you sell B2B sponsorship. So everybody listening to this is probably making buying decisions or involved in buying decisions, or they're just a nerd of the sport like I am as well. And they're not in the industry, but they might want to be in the industry. But most of the people listening either are professional athletes or they have a full-time job where they make these types of decisions. So thinking like HubSpot or other things that are business tools, and no running content creator or property is selling sponsorship to B2B entities like you could.
So pause there for a second because I think this is important, right? So, Jonathan, your podcast For the Long Run, my podcast, the Free Trail Podcast, are consumer facing. They're B2C media platforms. Second Nature is more of a prosumer B2B style platform, which means that it monetizes in a very different way. Instead of us using discount codes to sell footwear, for example, though that could work, that could be part of the model in the future. In all likelihood, our audience would be more receptive to different types of advertising, like you mentioned, a product like HubSpot, which is a business software, or like things that Aaron and I have talked about is like BOA, right? It's a product company, but it's B2B. It sells to footwear brands. It's a business that sells to a business. So they would potentially be an interesting partner for Second Nature relative to Free Trail, for example. I just wanted to drive that point home.
Yep.
Keep going, Jonathan.
The other thing that I was thinking about on my run prior to us jumping on was this concept of continuing the conversation via, I don't know, but everyone, I've wanted to talk to every single person you've had on the podcast, and I would pay for that.
That's the number
And
one piece of feedback we get is people listen to the show and they're like shouting on the trail while they listen to it, wishing they could chime in.
So you've created the Slack community, which if you're not a part of this Slack community, go to the link in the show notes. First, rate and review for Second Nature on Apple. It really makes a difference. As someone who hosts a podcast, I freaking love reading the reviews. So please go do that. Assuming you like the show, don't do it if you don't, and you've made it quite far.
Only say nice things about us, please.
5 stars only. But like think of a way you could have a live interaction with people, and similar to how you have a Patreon available for Free Trail, I think that there are people that would pay $20 to $100 a month for the ability to have very high level communications with guests, and then you could pay the guests and like totally disrupt the model and be like $250 for your hour. And I'll send my invoice after the call. But no, jokes aside, like, because if you're monetizing, I mean, then it gets back to the conversation of podcasting in general. Like somebody's monetizing the time of the guest, and it's usually the host. But in a scenario like this, like I think people would probably continue to volunteer their time because of the connections made, because of the people who come on a podcast are not often seeking compensation for their time, although I've come across that a couple of times, and it's an interesting conversation. But I think you could have like a forum style continuation of it. And like I said, like people pay a lot for courses from much less qualified people. And that's like a really, I'm not joking, that's like a really strong business model of people charging $100 to $500 for a serve yourself course that you watch at your own leisure. And it's, between 1 and 5 hours, and it probably takes 20 hours to create. But the model could be the same thing where it's, call it $25 a month, because the value of the content is so much higher than just a standard Patreon for $2 a month.
One of the things that we've been talking about a little bit that I've been thinking about is this idea of the local meetup. Because one of the things that I'm seeing in the Slack channel is that there's a lot of people in Portland, Oregon, where I live, and there's a lot of people in San Francisco where Dylan lives. And
Those
I've
are
actually
called
gone out.
groupies.
I've actually gone out and grabbed coffee with a grip of people from Portland just to like connect and share ideas and just kick stuff around and whatnot. And I wonder, I feel like there's a lot of people that would come out if we did an event in either one of those places. And maybe it doesn't need to be anything crazy, but maybe it could be. We could build that up into something on its own.
So look at the podcast My First Million, which I'm sure a lot of and I'm taking content that I was saving for later, but they do that, and it's like self-serve. So people so My First Million is a podcast. It's a business podcast that is co-hosted by Sam Parr and
Sean
Puri, and it's all about business dynamics and structure and literally making their first million. And Dylan, it looks like you want to jump in here.
No, not at all. Keep going.
Oh, and it's like a masterclass in how to learn. And I listen to it, and I often pull my phone out on runs and take notes. And I do things differently as a result of listening to the podcast. And they do these meetups, and they're not monetizing the meetups, but they're creating community, and they're creating connections that come from those people. And so it's all about that creation of value and creation of trust and establishing trust and building trust, which is built in droplets over time. And that's like there's nobody doing that in endurance with the spin of endurance sport. There are plenty of business podcasts, but no long-standing business of endurance sports.
So it goes back to the way that people typically make money in media, advertising, or subscription. What you're describing is a subscription. You just have to figure out then
what's the offer,
the product that they are subscribing to. Is it a community thing that uses Slack and maybe occasional regional meetups? Is it some sort of paywalled content? That's typically how media subscriptions work, is you take premium content, put it behind a paywall, and you have to pay to access it. Or is there a different future forward model that incorporates a little bit of all those things: learning, courses, community, and premium content? And in my opinion, that's probably the likeliest path to success for Second Nature personally. Aaron, you want to chime in?
Yeah, I think the other thing is, how do you explain to a potential partner the actual value of this audience? Because it's not really about anything other than the quality of people listening. The people who listen to Second Nature are the decision makers. They are the bosses. Like, we are speaking to the equivalent of like the whatever panel at Davos. We're not speaking to just like a random stadium of people. These are like hyper focused decision makers in the outdoor industry, and there is a level of value that's there. And I mean, when we talk about B2B, B2C, I think what's really interesting about the outdoor industry in general, whether it's cycling or running or anything, I feel like every single person is on some spectrum, right? Of like, I work at an outdoor company, or at some point in my career I want to. There's nobody who's, in my experience, is like, nope, I'm pretty good just like running up and down the hill or just riding. Like, everybody has always dreamed of being involved in their sport on some level. And I think there's something really interesting about how do we best communicate that too. The other thing that I wanted to kind of put out in front of you guys
Wait,
is
can I
sort of.
jump on?
Oh yeah,
Can
go
I
ahead.
jump on that one?
Yeah.
So it's all about the communicate. It's about the pitch, right? Like, you want to be in front of the decision makers, obviously. So when I pitch a brand, I match some trait of the audience to what I believe to be their audience. And so if you can align, like at Insight Tracker, we were specifically focused on sponsoring athletes and podcasters with audiences over 35 years old. And because that's who our customer was. And so if you know who a brand's customer is and you have that audience, then it's an obvious synergy, and it's just making the mechanics work. So the pitch is you're looking to speak with decision makers in the, in the business world, like this, people listen to this podcast to learn from some of the best people in the world, and they happen to also be decision makers in the brand. So it's aligning the what the brand is looking for and saying, hey, we have this. An example to make it extremely tangible. Um, Unfortunately, it didn't work, but my audience, we did a survey, and 70% or something like that of people have a dog. So we pitched Roughwear to say this is a target rich environment. They're an older brand. They haven't really tried paid media in that capacity, so unfortunately it didn't work. But like the pitch was right on target, and so it's aligning an audience with an offer or a product or service that fits perfectly.
I think that can be sometimes the most frustrating part about pitching a partnership, when you can see just clear as day, this is a slam dunk for everybody involved, but you have to get the other team on board and they're just like not, I don't know.
Well,
I don't know the right word.
she wanted to do it, but like couldn't get sign off on it. She's
Yeah.
like, "This is a great idea," but
Yeah.
couldn't get sign off on it because they
That,
had never done anything like that. And so, like when I pitched the solar company on this for the first time, I was like, "Okay, the endurance market is basically like golf, except they play a different sport, but the makeup of that person is pretty identical. They care about quality, they care about the environment, they have the discretion. On average, they have the discretionary income to spend. It's like the median is 2x the average American, and triathletes are 3x the average American. And so it was aligning that with a brand that sells something like that, that if you care about the environment, if you want to feel good about how you're spending your money, and when your lights are on, or this kind of stuff, like it was just a perfect alignment. And they were like, yeah, you're right, I do get it. And their CEO is a mountain biker.
wait, so if you have the data that 70% of your audience owns a dog, did you then, after the Roughwear thing didn't work out, did you ever consider making some sort of, you know, even like some merch or whatever that people could put on their dogs? Like, was that a
Never even
path you,
crossed my mind.
there you go. Free ideas come to
Yeah.
second nature.
All right, so bringing it back to this brand marketing versus performance marketing thing, Jonathan, for content creators, aspiring content creators, I'd be interested to hear you just describe ways in which you engage a potential partner to understand what their priorities are, where they sit on that spectrum between performance and brand, and how you determine that it's going to be a fit for the long run.
I just ask.
Be specific. You just say, what are your KPIs? How can this be a win for you? And like, are there partnerships where you're like, nah, that's a little bit too performance heavy for me, that doesn't fully appreciate the brand value that I'm also delivering?
Yeah, so I don't know why my camera is fuzzy here, but I specifically ask because if the partner doesn't know what the answer is, it's going to either be a really easy one to work with or a really hard one to work with, and it's never in between. And so the partner is usually stoked to answer that question. And they will say, like, an example is a sunglasses company that I worked with, and they're like, we're big in cycling and we want to get into running, and so awareness is important, but like we really need to drive sales. And so the outcome, like, he listed out everything that would deem the partnership a success. He needed content, he needed awareness, and he needed conversion. You don't often have the ability to do all three steps of the funnel between awareness, consideration, and conversion as you go down the funnel. And sometimes brands will say, oh, I just want everything, or I don't know what I want. And usually that's a sign that it's not going to work. But if a brand can tell you what they want, then you can do that. So Hyperice, for example, I just launched a partnership with them, and what is successful to them is content. So they need 30 to 60 seconds of video content that they can use for whitelisting and paid media ads. and they want the association of working with me, and they want my audience to see that I'm using Hyperice products. I'm using Hyperice products for 8 years. My audience knows that I use Hyperice products, and sales are a bonus, and they're really hard to track at times because they just ran this Prime Day sale and there was no discount code associated with the push. So again, it's another example of like the brand knowing exactly what they want and me driving the deliverables to help them execute against that. But yeah, it's as simple as asking the question. And if they don't know how to answer the question, which is like crazy that people don't know what their KPIs are, but it happens all the time.
I want to dig into this conversion thing because there's a lot of brands. We talked earlier in the pod about they see this performance formula working and then they just apply it everywhere. And, the affiliate link and the conversion is a big part of that. And it makes me nervous as someone who's putting these brand deals together that that's the only metric they're going to hold me accountable to. And there's a lot of data out there to say, like, people need to typically see a message 12 times before they actually click through on it. And so I'm looking at it saying, like, if I'm only being judged on the one time that somebody clicked on it, even though they've seen this message 12 times, I'm not being represented. And I feel like I'm going to be in a position where, I'm giving them big output on a brand level, but yeah, the click through is only going to be a fraction of of the value that I brought to the table. You can answer it from either the podcast or from your inside tracker position, but I'd be really curious what your thought process is.
What you're mentioning though is it's hard to measure attribution. That's the jargon in the industry. Go ahead, Jonathan.
So, and then do you measure first touch attribution? So the first time you can track somebody, or last touch attribution, so the discount code that was used. So you do a giveaway and it's your first engagement with the brand, but then 3 years later you make a purchase. Who gets credit for that? Is it the person who hosted the giveaway for the first time and put you into their marketing funnel that you got emails for the next, every week for 150 weeks? Or is it the discount code that Dylan posted and you were like, oh yeah, it's actually time to buy that thing? So that piece is a challenge. And then there's the challenge that, like, you're not the only one sharing discount codes or pushing affiliate links. And how do you credit appropriately? So where we landed with it was understanding channel-based attribution. And then, and this is what I suggest to brands, that you do a post-purchase survey to understand if it's a consumable or a consumer product. You do a post-purchase survey because you don't want to block anything in the transacting process. So you let somebody buy and then, hey, how did you hear about us? And you do it in a random order. This is best practice. You don't do it in alphabetical order. And you let people answer. And so then the idea is you're capturing information on the channel. And then you look at, like, is the engagement that you have with a specific partner, like, are they putting out quality information? Do you feel good about what they're saying about your brand? Is it organic? Things like that.
You mentioned that there's a difference between return on investment and return on ad spend. Educate me.
So return on investment, you have to subtract the cost of goods. And most brands, when they say ROI, they mean, or most people in general, when they say ROI, what they really mean is return on ad spend, because I can guarantee you that 98% of the people talking about ROI are not removing the cost of goods in the calculation for the return on ad spend.
So in other words, if you sell, just for the sake of using round numbers, $100,000 of shoes for your podcast partner, hypothetically, they're marking that up 2.5x. So that would be whatever.
So here's the math. So if you pay me $10,000, if you pay me $10,000 and I sell $30,000 worth of shoes, that's a 3x return on ad spend, which is like the bare minimum that brands tend to look for.
Yeah.
if they're looking for a sustainable path forward versus like 2021 when it was just like dollars in the door. It doesn't really matter what the cost is. Return ROI would say, okay, you've spent $10,000 on shoes, but our margin on shoes, so the cost of production is 50%. So you really brought in $5,000 of profit. So the 3x becomes 1.5x.
Yeah.
So
Copy.
everybody should be speaking in ROAS metrics from here on out because it
Love
sounds
me
better.
some ROAS.
Love
ROAS
me.
is higher. Yeah.
Yeah,
And you'll show
bigger
that you
number.
know what you're talking about.
That's it. It's like a double whammy. Like you sound extra knowledgeable and the number's higher. This is perfect.
Exactly. Yeah. You can always put lipstick on a pig.
Where do we go from here? I guess one thing I'd love to get your take on too, Jonathan, is just like the state of media now. Like, you operate a cool creator business that is revenue generating. Most of that revenue goes into the infrastructure needed to keep it going with some fun
Fortunately,
money.
not most.
Fortunately, not most. Okay, great. Okay, so anyway, for the long run is in a really healthy position. But at point being, it's your side hustle. You do
Right.
have a full-time job. I'm wondering, like, kind of where media is heading right now. You know, I think we're seeing this macro trend of institutions to individuals thing that's never been easier for people like us to start podcasts and build audiences. And, you know, it creates a really interesting opportunity for a person like you who has a great full-time job to earn extra income and have a creative outlet in a way that opens doors that probably you'd never expected to open. So maybe comments on the media industry, the creator economy, things that you're thinking about from that perspective.
Yeah, I think that we're still early, which is my hot take. I think there's a lot of room for more, and there's a lot of room for. I mean, these are three white guys on a podcast. There are a lot of us, and there's a lot of room for different conversations at different intersections within the running space. I spoke with a guy yesterday who writes at the intersection of running, community, and the Indian subcontinent. Like that, his Instagram handle is running sucks 101. Great stuff. But like that's so niche, and there are so many opportunities for these niche creators and niche podcasters. And like I love the line, there are riches in the niches, right? Like there are 100 million people who identify as runners. Um, there are so many people who have never listened to a single podcast. There are so many people who aren't paying any Patreon subscriptions on a monthly. Like the opportunity, we're at like the 2%. We're at the tip of the spear right now. And to me, that's exciting. And it makes me think of when Billy and Mario were saying iron sharpens iron, right? Like who cares that, 10,000 more running podcasts could exist, because the ones that deserve to be bubbled up to the top are going to bubble up to the top. And it's a free market. You can choose what you're listening to. And so that's the fun stuff. On the intersection of pro sports and pro athletics and media, I think there's a huge opportunity for a couple of things. One, the fellowship program that you guys were talking about a few weeks ago on the Business is Hard episode. If you haven't listened to that one, please go listen to it. It's
That's
fantastic.
got to be our most popular. Yeah.
Yeah, that was really, really good. Again, I like took my phone out and was like, notes. Something like that where you follow 5 athletes on an annual basis, like throughout a year, and you allow people to contribute to them, or you help people care. And there's so much room for helping people to care and guiding them to why they care. Did a partnership with Wazelle last fall around the Olympic trials, and their Underbird campaign. And so they had 5 athletes that they were supporting monetarily. They were helping with training, and I pitched them on. I was like, "Hey, I love your brand. I'm a dude. This is a women's running apparel brand. Like, just listen." They're like, "Yeah, this is great. Let's do this." And so I told their story on a monthly basis with one athlete each month, and it was 95% about the athlete and 5% about the brand. So there was some, payback of the brand partnership aspect, but those athletes gained a bunch of followers, and that brand, Wazelle, got some really easy to distribute content. Like they didn't have to do anything besides pay for the partnership, and they had never paid for a partnership. It was their first paid media opportunity, and we did like 4x return on spend, and then they went and sponsored more things. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity for creators to leverage their audience or their platform and highlight athletes. So I've been doing this with Puma. I've had a partnership with Puma for a year and a half now, and I go all around the country and do panels with their athletes and then distribute the video and audio for them. And Puma is interested in brand marketing. They are wanting to communicate with people that they're in running, they're doing cool stuff in running, and they work with awesome athletes. And the fact that we happen to sell a bunch of shoes with the coupon code of the podcast is like gravy for them, although they told me that the code was used for 3,300 uses, which I was like, no, it wasn't. Not from me. It wasn't. But it was on like a coupon site. It's like I would have been happy with 300, not 3,000.
There's an attribution hack right there.
There you go.
Well, they were like, "Oh, this is
own it,
they're
own
like,
it."
yeah, they're like, "This is great, like great job." And I was like, "Okay, I'd love to take the win, but like I'll never do this again. Everything else is a colossal failure compared to, generating $500,000 in shoe sales." But the point is that they are looking at it from a brand marketing perspective and making it easier to tell the stories of their athletes, and basically like outsourcing all of that work to me as a agency effectively, and creating all this content with not much work for them, but involving me on events and things like that. And so like any creator or any podcaster who has a relationship with a brand, like the conversation should be around who are the other athletes that represent this brand, and how do I help you leverage them. So literally every partnership has the opportunity to do something like this because almost nobody is only sponsoring one person.
What a freaking episode, boys. Jonathan, that was a freaking education seminar. You got one more, Lutzy?
I got a galaxy brain, but I've here's where I want to slide this in. Of we're talking about podcasts, we're talking about advertising, we're talking about attribution, all these different things. But what we should talk about is growth. How do we get podcasts to actually grow? Because there's a lot of people that want to do podcasts. There's a lot of people who are currently doing podcasts. I have a galaxy brain idea about growth, but before we hit that, I would love to just hear from you, like what is working other than just repetition over time? Because you've obviously been doing it for quite some time. What are some of the inflection points on your journey so far?
I published a trailer in March of this year after we hit, I think it was 300 episodes, and Tony with the Sony produced it. No, actually he didn't. It was a guy, Eric. Eric produced it. Anyway, it was like a recap of why did I start the podcast, and what is it about really. And we spiked, and we captured some of those listeners going forward. I've also sponsored other podcasts. I sponsored Trail Society. I sponsored the Rambling Runner podcast. And it's kind of hard to know if it works, but listenership was up for the following weeks, and sort of continued.
That's funny. Real quick, I listened to a podcast with Austin Reef, the CEO of Morning Brew,
yeah.
and he said that like audiences help grow like audiences. In other words, like newsletter, posts or
people
whatever.
Like you, yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah, people like, so if I subscribe to a newsletter and they suggest a different newsletter, I'm more likely to subscribe to that newsletter than if that newsletter suggested a podcast for me to go adopt that podcast.
Yeah. The other piece that has worked really well has been any of the partners that I work with where I highlight their athletes, asking them to put the episode in their newsletter. or their in their email communications, because some of these brands have 100,000 or 500,000 subscribers, and like Wazelle did this, and they were happy to do it because it benefits them and it benefits me. I did a partnership with Boulder, and they have an email list of, I don't know, 100,000 people, and they were emailing about like weekly of monthly events that I was hosting here in Boulder. Like that grew my email list in addition to the podcast. But unfortunately, what I've realized over the last year in particular is that there's no hack, and it's really just word of mouth and doing it and continuing to do it and continuing to do it. That's what, or you go on Joe Rogan.
Consistency over time. All right, what's your Galaxy brand, Lucy?
All right, I got a Galaxy brain for growth then. Okay, so exactly what you said. Word of mouth and potentially social proof are the two things that likely help build an audience. And one thing that makes me feel good about what we're doing on Second Nature is that it seems like everybody who finds out about us continues to listen to us. So the real goal is just getting out in front of more people, spreading that word of mouth, getting more people aware of what we're doing here. We've curated a really, really switched on and early adopter group from the outdoor industry of all the heavy hitters. So if you're listening to this, that's awesome and a good sign. But obviously, it'd be great to grow it, and that only helps with all these other metrics that we're talking about. So my Galaxy Brain idea, you've maybe heard of this concept of the thunderclap, right? Where say GoPro launches a camera and all their athletes post about it on Instagram, right? Like video that they hand out. But what I have never seen done before is a LinkedIn thunderclap. So imagine if we had all the listeners of this podcast who are like the captains of the outdoor industry, and
I love
everybody posts a LinkedIn message
to
about
this
how,
episode.
yes, they all post about Second Nature and how much they love it. And then here's the important part. So this is word of mouth, but here's where it gets interesting. We take everybody from Slack and anybody who's listening and we repost them, but then everybody from the Slack channel comes in and comments on each one of the posts with like a +1, +1, +1.
Dude, this
So
is not a Galaxy brain. This
What?
is not a Galaxy.
What are you talking about?
This has to be
This
done.
is the most self-serving Galaxy brain ever. I thought you were going to say we were going to start a podcast growth agency or something like that. Not we
No,
were going to
but
guilt trip all of our listeners into posting about us on LinkedIn.
it's the gentleman's agreement. So my first million, they're like, if you listen to 5 episodes, you have to rate and review. Like you have to leave 5 stars, 5 listens, 5 stars. The way that they were able to do that was because they spoke directly to the people listening, like you're doing right now. So like there's a call to action. The call to action is take your favorite episode from Second Nature and post it on LinkedIn and share one reason why you like it. Not share why you like it. Share one reason. You have to be incredibly explicit when you make an ask. My boss one time told me when talking about referrals, he's like, you can't just ask for someone to suggest your program or whatever you want. You need to say, who are 3 people that you can think of that would like this? So be very specific and be like, all right, people who are listening who have somehow made it 60 minutes into this discussion, like post your favorite episode on LinkedIn with one reason why, and tag Dylan and Aaron.
Okay.
I'm just saying, Debo, it can be self-serving. It's still
okay.
Galaxy Brain.
I don't know if it qualifies as a Galaxy brain. I mean, Galaxy brain is a business idea, right? Okay.
Moonshot.
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
All right. We can quibble over the definition of Galaxy brain. Hey guys, I got to jump here soon, so we got to move to BPC. Jonathan, you get us started.
Okay, I'm gonna go Boulderthon, Ketone IQ, my first million. Boulderthon is a race that I'm on the board of. Phil Dumonte is the race director. He's a 240 something marathoner who cares about the front, middle, and back of the pack. The 5K was the biggest prize purse in the country at $40,000. He just ran an excellent event, and that brand is strong here in Boulder. Ketone IQ, I know it's a sponsor of Free Trail. I freaking love this stuff. I took a double shot before this episode, so if you think that this was a good one, you can thank Michael and the team at Ketone IQ. And my first million, I've talked about it on this episode already. The content and the people who, listen to this podcast would like that podcast.
Yeah. Good pod. Lucy, did you bring anything today or should we wrap?
I got you. I'll go quick. The Devil's Climb. This is a film that's coming out on the 17th of October, so close to the time that this pod drops. It's going to be on Hulu and Disney. It's Alex Honnold and Tommy Caldwell, both incredible athletes. Do you know about Tommy Caldwell? There's another film called The Dawn Wall, which you have to see. This guy's story is crazy. Anyway, it's a big Nat Geo Disney Plus film about a big effort, big project. I love the project athlete, and this is their next big thing. So I'm excited to check this one out, and shout out to our friends at RXR who likely had a big hand in that one too.
Okay, dope. All right, I'll close us down here. I had the opportunity to use a Leatherman tool recently for the first time in a long time.
Nice.
Good product. The Leatherman tool is a good product.
It's
American
a dad
made,
answer right there.
American brand. I mean, I'm always talking about outdoor footwear or apparel or some cool piece of content or book or podcast that I read. So I'm zigging here.
Do you have a good weed whacker too?
No, I don't. But my son would love to play with one. So I just got him a leaf blower. So I got to get a weed whacker next time. Well, boys, that was a great podcast. We're getting deep in the weeds on content monetization, on marketing strategies, on helping our brand partners be successful and understanding exactly what successful means to them. A lot of good stuff. Jonathan, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.